What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me today. And we are back in the continuation of our series for our NHL 2021-2022 season prediction. As we continue our previews for the Central Division, today's video is going to be dedicated to one of the more underrated teams in the NHL, the Minnesota Wild. So coming into last season, the Minnesota Wild were seen as the definition of mediocrity. Over the course of the last 3-4 years, the Minnesota Wild have kind of been an up and down team. Some years they would struggle to make the playoffs, and other years when they would get in, they'd always fall in the first round. But this season, they definitely pleasantly surprised a lot of people. They were one of the more fun teams to watch, and they had an amazing regular season. So diving deeper into these stats, they finished with a very solid 35-16-5 record for a total of 75 points, very good regular season, and third in the West Division on a 110-point pace. But unfortunately for them, yet again, we got the same old Minnesota Wild in the playoffs as they fell in the first round to the Vegas Golden Knights. Taking a look at their offensive stats, they had a 3.21 goals for per game, which was solid, top 10 in the NHL at 9th, and a 17.6% power play percentage, which was a little bit lackluster, tied for 23rd. Taking a look at their defensive stats, they averaged a 2.84 goals against per game, which was 15th in the league, and an 80.8% penalty kill percentage, which was tied for 11th in the NHL. Looking at these stats, I'd say it's pretty respectable across the board. Aside from their power play, that can definitely use some brushing up. Taking a look at their top 5 scorers from last season, first place being the Calder Trophy holder, the rookie Kirill Kaprizov, the Phenom, with 27 goals and 24 assists for 51 points in 55 games. Coming over from the KHL at 24 years old, he obviously lived up to all the hype from Minnesota Wild fans, and they hope that he can be the cornerstone of this franchise for the next decade to come. And in second, we have Kevin Fiala, who in 50 games scored a very solid 20 goals and 20 assists for 40 points. Honestly, I really like Kevin Fiala, and I think he's been a great fit for Minnesota. Ever since he's came over from Nashville, he's really popped off a little bit here. Then in third, Matt Zuccarello, who had a pretty good bounce back season in 42 games, had 11 goals and 24 assists for 35 points. Zuccarello is a little bit older, and he's not really going to give you a ton of goals, but in terms of his overall play, he's pretty good, very good playmaker. He makes those around him better. So in fourth, we had Jordan Greenway, who had a pretty surprisingly good offensive year. 56 games, 6 goals, 26 assists for 32 points. Honestly, I did not expect this type of production from him, and I'm not exactly sure what his ceiling is, but I mean, good on him. He had a pretty respectable year. He led the team in assists. And at fifth, we have Joel Eriksson Ek, who had 19 goals and 11 assists for 30 points in 56 games. In regards to a Minnesota team, it doesn't have a ton of center depth. Joel Eriksson Ek had a pretty surprising breakout year in terms of his goal scoring. He definitely is a bright young piece for the future of this franchise. Taking a look at the goaltending, Mini kind of had a tandem here. So first we have Cam Talbot, who in 33 games had a 19-8-5 record with the 2.63 goals against average and a .915 save percentage. Very respectable numbers. Honestly, entering this season, I didn't have a ton of expectation for Cam Talbot. I thought he'd probably be a serviceable backup, but he proved that he still can be a pretty decent starter in this league. Then they have the younger guy, Kaapo Kähkönen, with 24 games, a 16-8 record, a 2.88 goals against average, and a .902 save percentage. Now, I wouldn't say statistically he had the best year, but he did have a ton of wins here, and also he's going to be pivotal for this goaltending moving forward for the Minnesota Wild organization. Even with the addition of Kirill Kaprizov, this still isn't really a super flashy team, and a lot of people are going to overlook this team entering this season. I know that for a fact, but they do have some pretty solid pieces and something to build on moving forward here. Entering this season, I feel like there's some people who might have some lower expectations, but I still feel like they will be in the playoff race. They're likely going to make the playoffs, especially if they can re-sign Kirill Kaprizov. But obviously, being in a much tougher division now in the Central, it's going to be a lot more competitive and a lot more difficult, but we'll see what happens. Now, taking a look at their offseason moves, I would say they kind of downgraded a little bit. Sure, they did add Alex Goligoski, who can still be a pretty decent offensive defenseman, and Kulikov to add some extra depth on the blue line, but they did lose some much more important pieces on their blue line, one being Carson Soucy, who was a very solid defenseman for them, who got claimed by Seattle. Obviously, buying out Ryan Suter as well, a big part of that team no longer going to be there, and his presence will be missed. They also lost Ian Cole, who's a very solid depth piece on the blue line as well, and of course losing Nick Bonino, who can be a still serviceable bottom six center. Now, based on the great season they had last season, you would think that maybe they'd be a playoff lock, but I'm just going to go with a playoff hopeful here because they are in a much tougher division, and there's a little bit of question marks, some seeds of doubt on what this Wild team can do moving forward. Taking a look at my predictions for the top 5 scorers for the Wild next season, first being Kirill Kaprizov. I have him scoring 42 goals and 40 assists for 82 points in a full 82 game season. I expect him to be about a point per game. Obviously, Kaprizov is the clear star of this team. As we saw in his rookie year, he was amazing. Now, the contract dispute that could impact where the Wild stand, but if he is to be re-signed by the start of the season, he should be around a point per game, and I would expect at the very least a 35-goal campaign, probably pushing 40, maybe more. I have him more than 40 goals and about 80 plus points. And in second, we have Matt Zuccarello, who I've been scoring a pretty solid 16 goals and 44 assists for 60 points. Now, Zuccarello had a pretty good bounce back season, especially playing with Kirill Kaprizov, and I feel like if those two are going to be paired once again together this season, he should feed him a lot, and he'll likely be a 60-point player as a result because he's an outstanding playmaker, very underrated piece. And third, I have Kevin Fiala scoring 27 goals and 31 assists for 58 points. Again, Fiala is a very underrated piece, and I think he's really broken out ever since he's come to Minnesota, and I would expect him to at least score about 25 goals and about 50 plus points. In fourth, I have Joel Eriksson Ek scoring 25 goals and 24 assists for 49 points. I would have a little bit of concern about Minnesota entering the season if this guy was expected to be the #1 center, but I still feel like for what he can do, Joel Eriksson Ek is a very solid second-line center. And based on the production and the next level he took his game, I would expect him to hover around 20 goals and about 50 points. And in fifth, I have Jordan Greenway scoring 14 goals, 30 assists for 44 points. Honestly, Greenway's a total wild card for me because I didn't expect the type of year he had last season. He was very productive in terms of his assists, but he doesn't really score a ton of goals. He only had 6 goals last year. If I'm being totally honest, I don't think I see a ton of upside in his game. So right now, I think I'm just going to hover him around 45-ish points. I'm not exactly sure if he can hit more than that, if he can replicate his season and be a great playmaker. But I don't see him scoring a ton of goals, which is why I feel like his points might be a little bit down to what most people might expect, honestly. All right, now giving my predictions on where I expect this team to be next season. Although I'm not sure if they're going to be the same team they were last year. I do think they are a little bit weaker. I still expect them to at least make the playoffs. So with that, I have the Minnesota Wild finishing 4th in the Central Division with a 43, 29, and 10 record for a total of 96 points, and they will make the playoffs as the Western Conference first wild card. So I do like a lot of pieces on this team, and I still think that they should be a playoff team, but I just don't think they'll be as dominant as they were last season. Outside of guys like Kaprizov, Zuccarello, Fiala, I do have a little bit of concerns about their offensive depth and where they can get the production from their bottom 6. And although I do think the defense is respectable, I definitely think they got quite a bit weaker. In terms of the goaltending, I think it's fine as of right now, but I still would say it's more or less middle of the pack because I do have some questions if Cam Talbot can have the same type of year or how Kaapo Kähkönen will look next season. Can he take another step or will have a similar year, kind of a below average goaltender? But overall, I still think it's a relatively solid team, and even though the Central is pretty tough, I would expect this team to make the playoffs. At the very least, they are going to be in the hunt in the final days of this regular season. So that's going to do it for my season expectations and my season preview on the Minnesota Wild. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments section where you think the Wild stand this upcoming year. Now, assuming Kirill Kaprizov is re-signed, I know that can impact a lot of people's expectations on this team, but assuming he does re-sign, where do you guys see the Wild? Do you guys see them as the same dominant regular season team they were last year and could potentially surprise in the playoffs? Or do you think this is a team that just had an amazing season and maybe they fall back to earth and maybe people think they're more of a mediocre team that overachieved and they probably don't make the playoffs? Again, let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys so much for watching. Click like if you like this video, and please consider subscribing to the channel. All right, I'm gonna get out of here. Thank you guys again, and we'll see you in the next video. See you guys later.